our mission to support interdisciplinary research and public programs that advance knowledge about human experience in social, historical, and cultural contexts. Our collaborative program and community engagement are designed to demonstrate the ways in which the humanities provide tools that reinforce the values of a democratic society. Now, before we begin today, I do want to take this opportunity to announce the theme of next year's public event series. It is Social Securities. In the coming year, we are going to be considering human security throughout history and into the present moment. Our programs will be exploring the kinds of protections necessary to ensure a person's or a society's security, and the situations in which people and communities are made to feel and are insecure. We will also pose the question of whether security itself is always to be valued, or whether its relinquishing can create new possibilities for agency and discovery. Our programs will draw upon perspectives from the humanities, arts, and humanistic social sciences, and we are very interested in hearing from all of you about ideas for speakers and events relating to the theme of social security. So please contact me with your thoughts, and a full description of the theme is on the IHC website, and you will also be receiving a D-list announcement as of yesterday. You should have gotten it, but I know it's not out yet, but do look forward to it and spread the word. So social securities. Now, on to our 2017-2018 IHC Faculty Fellowship presentation. These fellowships, you should know, are extremely competitive, and they are coveted as they allow for 1/4 of release time from teaching, as you can see on the well-rested faces of our fellows. The IHC Advisory Committee is able to select only 3 per year, and I must tell you that this is a very difficult selection process because our pool of applicants is always outstanding, and there are many projects we would love to support, and the 3 that you're going to hear about today were really the very strongest of all of them. So it is wonderful that all 3 of our faculty fellows are able to be with us today to present the fruits of their labor, and so without further ado, allow me to present our first fellow. And I'll just say, in terms of our order today, we will have each of the fellows present, and then at the end we will cluster and gather questions. So when you have questions for our first and second presenters, do not forget them, jot them down, and I promise you we'll come back to you. So I think our presentations will take about an hour, then we'll have time for Q&A, and then we will have a reception where we can continue to vet our fellows and further the conversation. So our first presenter will be Erin Khuê Ninh, a professor of Asian American Studies and an affiliate of Comparative Literature and Feminist Studies. Erin earned her BA and PhD degrees in English at Berkeley, and before coming to UCSB, she was the UC President's Postdoctoral Fellow in the English Department at UCLA. She teaches courses on topics ranging from Asian American mystery fiction to the Vietnamese American experience, with an emphasis on family and intergenerational conflict, power and subject formation, gender and the embodied subject, mental health, and sexual violence. Her book, In Gratitude, the Debt-Bound Daughter in Asian American Literature, was awarded the Literary Studies Book Award from the Association for Asian American Studies. Was that in 2013? In 2013. She has served on the board of the Association for Asian American Studies, as publisher and then blog editor for Hyphen magazine, and on the screening committee and as editor of the catalog for the Vietnamese International Film Festival. The project for which she was awarded the fellowship, Almost Perfect, Passing for the Model Minority, is conceived over and against a pathological reading of Asian American college imposters in order, that is, this reading is conceived against the pathological reading in order instead to argue that the actions of Asian American college imposters in fact are representative of the model minority, in insofar as the pursuit of the narrow perfection of the success frame makes all aspiring Asian American subjects, in some sense, imposters or impersonators who are passing for their own racial identity. Please help me now to welcome Erin.
While still maintaining a veneer of analytical and authoritative scholarship. But the second book is actually both a sequel and a kind of do-over. The title's changed a bit. It's now called Perfect Lies. And it takes up the same question of what happens when tiger parenting meets small minority. But IRL, in real life, such that I am chasing interviews and applying, round after round of IRB approval. One of my accomplishments this year has actually been to learn a whole set of skills that I did not learn in grad school. But I also learned how woefully difficult it is to coax interviews from a closed set of subjects when the heart of your project is a handful of people whose actions have brought them infamy and, in one case, imprisonment. So in May 2007, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about two of the key college professors that I'm focusing on. So in May 2007, just 2 weeks before the end of spring quarter classes at Stanford, campus police escorted a young woman off of campus. Asia Kim had been posing as a freshman there since orientation day, and she would have made a crack undercover agents, claiming that an administrative error had left her temporarily without housing. She managed to convince a pair of roommates to let her crash in their dorm room for 2 whole quarters, and then managed to finagle a bed in another dorm for most of the spring quarter. She was crying in through a window. She left the job. So she also learned the exam schedules for courses that she claimed to be taking, and she would buy textbooks accordingly and study with friends for tests in the library, posted of stress or excitement, according to these schedules, and to a blog and social media. And the audience for this cruise then was not only and arguably not primarily the Stanford freshmen. It included her sister, her parents, extended family, and community members, and church members back in Forest California, where she came from. Jennifer Pan would have graduated high school in 2003 had she not failed the calculus exam that jeopardized her diploma and her early acceptance to Ryerson University. Rather than retake this one course, though, and therefore gain the one credit that she was missing to claim her college position, she just told everyone nothing, that everything was fine, and she pretended to go to college for 2 years at Ryerson, transferred to Informal college program, everything according to the plans that her father had laid out for her, and of course, finally, one day, everything is discovered, falls apart. Long story short, in November 2010, 24 years of age, Jennifer Pan hired hitmen to have her parents killed. Her mother is dead, and her father recovered from a gunshot wound to the head. He reported that he'd seen his daughter in intimate conversation with his men when she was spending life imprisonment. So, since first proposing this project last year, I've discovered 2 additional cases of Asians falsely posing as students at variously prestigious universities, bringing my tally now to 9. It is only fair to note, though, that I found the same number of college attendance. Even more than the regular form, Asian Americans are disproportionately represented. I'll be telling you mainly about Asia today because I've made most progress with her case so far, but a bit of framework to start. To a kind of deception that I'm interested in, we don't see much about Asian American scholarship. With the exception of one chapter in a recent book by Dr. Zhao and Zhu, which recalibrates the non-minority paradigm to how second-generation Asian Americans, young people live them today, live the model minority paradigm today. So the authors, because of course the paradigm, the term was first coined in 1966, that was some time ago. The authors argue that Asian Americans are measured by a tightly defined success rate. Quote, earning straight A's, graduating high school as a valedictorian, attending an elite university, attaining an advanced degree, working in one of 4 high-status professional fields, and we can tell you what they are, this frame not only constitutes the model minority stereotype in the mainstream, but it has also helped the children of immigrants themselves understand reductively as their cultural identity. So synonymous are these components with what it is to be Asian American, that those who fall short in any particular, right? Those who attend a lesser UC, or instead of an Ivy League, for example, feel themselves not only to be failures, but to be ethnically or racially inauthentic, to be imposters. Moreover, Li Zhao finds that the pressure to achieve success rate can yield not only intergenerational conflict, but children who lie about their accomplishments in order to save face. And I believe it's this rigid frame that turns overachieving Asian Americans into people who cannot stop acting like the model minority. For my book project, I also moved that this frame be considered an instance of genre, namely an emotionally invested pattern set of expectations about how to act and how to feel about social realities and what is possible. As cribbed from Lauren Blount, genre is a flexible construct ordering not only aesthetic products, but also in temporal experiences. Quote, genres also organize conventions about what might be hoped for, explicitly or secretly, and bargains that can be made with life. I use genre and also Blount's cruel optimism with attachments and ongoing investments, especially those to what hurts or makes no sense. By these lights, the model minority is less a reductive cliche to hastily apply by strangers, more the efficient code of formula fiction shared by practitioners as well as their audience. These tools, I think, can explain how do well-behaved Asian Americans become people with no felt options, no thinkable alternatives to the success rate. I'm going to start by outlining the genre of imposter, of subject, by way of juxtaposition. I have a grand total of 14 non-Asian imposters so far. This is likely not a complete inventory, but my 2 sets do collectively present some clear contrasts. First of all, 10 of the non-Asians do have prior or subsequent criminal records. Theft, in most cases, sometimes violence. Many forged transcripts or letters of rec to gain actual admittance to universities. And yet those degrees, right, if received, might have paved the way to more lucrative cause down the road. Serial plagiarist Adam Wheeler had just about managed to parlay his Harvard acceptance into Rhodes and Fulbright scholarships when he was finally caught. So nearly 3/4 of these cases, the non-Asian cases, seem to be driven at least in part by greed, right? Behavior extreme, yes, unethical, yes, but rational to game the system. As said of Adam, quote, like any rational economic actor, he sought to procure a diploma from the finest college with maximum efficiency. In contrast, an article that gleefully compared Asia and Adam was stumped by Asia's aims. For Kim, this article read, the benefits were a little unclear since she wasn't actually enrolled in the the cost opportunity. It's a high opportunity cost because she wasn't actually getting a college degree and anything else. But it's precisely that vacuum of obvious motives that makes a college pretender a modeling model. I call Asia's project passing because there is a tradition in literary scholarship that takes the J. Gatsby, Benjamin Franklin figure self-inventors, right? Class traversers, appearance-conscious operators for not only quintessential Americans, but also the prototype on which ethnic assimilation and racial passing are built. Still, Asia stood neither to improve her class status nor to avoid racialization. So her project doesn't seem to be about the crossing of social barriers. So how then is it passing? Well, for starters, drawing from sociologist Irving Goffman's work on stigma, passing may be succinctly defined as, quote, the management of undisclosed, discrediting information about the self. And sure enough, by deception, Asia sought to hide her rejection by Stanford. But what's more, by keeping her apparently within the success frame, deception allowed her to pass for a second-generation Asian American as that racial identity is currently defined. Scholars of historical race passing maintain that, quote, since it is possible to pass only because that thing is already invisible, passing is therefore less a matter of hiding something than refusing or failing to acknowledge something. In practice, race norms work through assumptions of a privileged category, so that where whiteness is that privileged category, subjects are immediately assumed to be white in the absence of any telling marks of color. End quote. But likewise, in the absence of any disclosed, discrediting information, Asia is assumed to be a full member of her own visible, privileged racial category. That is, to consider Asia's ruse as passing is to understand the key difference in racialization and hierarchy in schools today versus in 1966. In ethno-racially diverse contexts where Asian immigrant families have reached a critical mass, Lee and Zhao find that Asian American students, quote, looked not to native-born whites, but to high-achieving ethnic peers, co-ethnic peers, or siblings, right, other Asian Americans, as their reference group when measuring their success. And moreover, that other racial groups concur with this new academic hierarchy. This jettisons the map on which whiteness is the destination for upward mobility, making a fundamental break from both classic assimilation and segmented assimilation models. In other words, the social models and personal stakes of today's hard-driving immigrant's child have shifted. For Asia, racial masquerade was not a matter of trading up for whiteness, but of preventing the loss of her identity as model minority. Her mechanism was not the calculated pursuit of gain, but the rather more primal avoidance of ruin. Avoidance as the deep function of Asia's passing explains something of the apparent austerity of her time at Stanford. For a trespasser and a liar, this young woman was strangely disciplined. In the press, one source after another said that she, quote, often worked late into the night on school papers. Asia said she was a human biology major and spent many evenings doing homework. All year, she pretended to study for exams that she would never take. My sources couldn't remember, because I did manage to interview some people at Stanford, couldn't remember her ever attending a party at the dorms where she stayed. This is quite unlike the non-Asian imposters, one of whose schoolmates began to notice odd things about him, like he never seemed to have any homework. A summary offered of this other young man's scam in no way resembles Asia's. Quote, you get to go to parties, you get free food, you get to hang out with people your age and have fun. Pretty much, he did nothing. He's being a bum. So this juxtaposition is not a statement about work ethics, but evidence of great disparity in what two young people felt to be at stake in lying to every loved one and every stranger. Having procured nearly 9 months of continuing financial support, freedom from parental oversight, and absolutely nothing by way of obligations, Asia spent her free time and disposable income in the campus library, approximating a freshman's devotions to textbooks and keyboards. This is behavior that attests to the work of passing, the everyday and every waking moment quality of acting her racial part at Stanford. But Judith Butler's original argument about normative gender performativity is useful here in extension. Quote, because gender is a project which has cultural survival at its end. The term strategy better suggests the situation of duress under which gender performance always and variously occurs. As a strategy of survival, gender is a performance with clearly punitive consequences. Whether Li and Zhao in their study of Chinese and Vietnamese in LA, or Sarah Lee, another sociologist, in her study of Koreans in New York, Asian American scholars report interviewees as speaking one after another of the deep personal and familial shame incurred by a child's failure to meet any single measure of the success rate. What these young respondents tend to call loss of face might be read as a loss of social viability, where, quote, to remain visible in a human society, the subject must cite and mime the very norms that created his or her intelligibility in the first place. In other words, Asia's passing is twofold. It is analogy, yes, for literal deception of racial proportions. And it is metaphor. Like drag, her artifice exposes a performance by which all model minorities manage their public selves. That is, Asia was indeed pretending to an identity writ small as Stanford student, but writ large as non-minority. This is also the only racial identity assigned to and allowed her. And it is the identity that was formerly as much hers as any other Asian American impersonators. Consider that her performance on the day after she opened her rejection letter and the day before she received it might not have changed in any particular. It's just that this committee had since reclassified her a fake. So, in interviews, it's been key for me to vet my explanation of Asia against cries that she must have been a compulsive liar, for example, right, or a con artist. This has been a challenge, considering that my primary subjects have gone into hiding or refused to talk. I've managed 5 interviews so far, 3 former dormmates, 1 Stanford administrator, and Asia's youth pastor from high school. And I do feel that some possibilities are now stronger, others more remote. I learned that at Stanford, Asia wore basic jeans, sweatshirt. That was basically her uniform. She did attend a Korean drumming club for a few months, which was not mentioned in the press. She didn't linger to socialize, though, either before or after. While she was there, she made no outsized claims of achievement or talent, nothing extra on top of just being there. And all of this suggests to me that she was basically avoiding attention rather than calling it to herself. Unlike Adam Wheeler, who seemed to take great pleasure in accepting awards that his classmates coveted. What Asia needed wasn't to outshine, but to be safely unremarkable in the spirit of assimilation. She was, in other words, not greedy. She stole neither riches nor reputation beyond what was necessary. And from her former pastor, I learned that among her high school peers in the youth group, Asia was the one who could be counted on to do the paperwork. So the unglamorous, detail-oriented support labor of things, in the church. She did not vie to be the limelight, or even to the social capital, holding the mic or the camera for certain kinds of projects that they did. She was a good worker, he said, someone you wanted on your team. If she accepted a task, it would be done, it would be done well. This tells me that my original sense of her actually was a little bit off. I imagined her as vain about her success, or too invested in the business of beating people at perfection to give it up with a highly public rejection. But now I think, while in performance, her deception at Stanford was not a spectacle, not about the appearance of superiority or success. It was instead the workaday stuff of being a thoroughly good kid, one without forbidden wishes or different aspirations than what was asked of her. And maybe that's it, the difference between Asia or Jennifer and those of us who find more mundane ways to rebel and to save ourselves. Even when deepest undercover, there is no mention of these girls shopping or partying, no hints that Asia, for one, even dated. Floating inside bubbles they wrought at great cost, they were each in possession of extraordinary freedom to reinvent themselves. But that the buttoned-down, unimaginative existence that each chose seems to have been, quite literally, their fantasy life, tells me how utterly they had adopted their parents' ambitions for them as a total rubric of the self. Some of us are better at being immigrants' kids than others. Some of us are damn good kids, right? Others less so. And I am starting to suspect that Asia and Jennifer are once the best of us.
Our second IHC faculty fellow, Jennifer Holt. Jennifer is a faculty member in the Department of Film and Media Studies and a faculty research affiliate of the Center for Information Technology and Society. She received her PhD from the UCLA's Department of Film, Television, and Digital Media, and before that her MA from the Department of Radio, TV, and Film at the University of Texas, Austin, and her BS in Broadcast Journalism from the University of Illinois, Champaign. Before coming to UCSB, she held a number of teaching and research positions, including at Harvard and Stockholm universities, and she is also former director of the Carsey Wolf Center's Media Industries Project and a founding member of the editorial collective for the Media Industries Journal. Her research and teaching are in the areas of media industry studies, policy and regulation, and digital media. She is the co-editor of 3 collections: Media Industries, History, Theory, and Method, Connected Viewing, Selling, Sharing, and Streaming Media in the Digital Age, and Distribution Revolution, Conversations about the Future of Film and Television. She is also the author of Empires of Entertainment, Media Industries, and the Politics of Deregulation, 1980 to 1996. The monograph she worked on with the support of an IHC faculty fellowship addresses the global regulation of data technology and cloud infrastructure and encompasses issues related to internet law and policy, digital privacy issues, and governance from a critical humanities perspective. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer.
coming, and thanks to the IHC for this really awesome award. It's been really great to be able to do some work on this book during the quarter, and like Erin, I changed the title of my book too, because now that you have some time to think about it, you think, oh, that last title wasn't so good. So now it's called Cloud Policy Regulating Digital Freedom, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the project now. Despite the fact that media policy administers control over much of our culture and our national character and the boundaries of our personal liberties and the contours of public expression, as an object, it has not historically been conceptualized as central to humanities scholarship and research. I've been really interested in enacting that shift with my work because, after all, media regulation is not just about maintaining market competition from an economic or a legal standpoint. It's about the public interest and the valuation of individual liberties and citizenship and cultural values like privacy, the profiteering of private corporations on the backs of the public utilities, and the longue durée of those histories. And now God even is part of our conversation about digital media policy. So it's a gateway through which all media must pass, and the arena where many of our individual and collective freedoms are either defended or destroyed. And so articulating the stakes for arts and culture are precisely, in my view, what is necessary to preserve the core values of independence and diversity and freedom inherent in a democratic media system. So today I want to talk about some of those freedoms in the digital space, specifically about the legal and cultural crises surrounding the regulation of data in the cloud. It's part of the work I'm doing on the book, which is a layered history of media policy, beginning with the '96 Telecommunications Act, so it's kind of a sequel, it's kind of like the Empire Strike Back kind of thing, and continuing through the Obama administration with an epilogue about whatever the hell has happened during the Trump era. And I'm going to write that last, obviously. Ultimately, the book is about the importance of media policy to preserving our freedoms of expression and privacy and access to information. It's the story of the phone company, it's the story of Hollywood studios, cable companies, Silicon Valley, television networks, and the digital citizen. It's a layered history that details how various media technologies and distribution infrastructures have been politically and legally framed over time, and how those frameworks have created the industrial landscape that we have now, and how that's been translated into cultural practices and norms. The book begins in 1986, which was like a moment that it looked like the federal government might just wrap their heads around digital media policy, but of course they didn't. Patricia Ofterheide has written a comprehensive analysis of the '96 Telecommunications Act in which she recounts its, quote, long history of inelegance and the political processes that trace back to the earliest imprecise uses of public interest in the 1920s. I like that characterization a lot, and this most recent history I'm talking about today is a continuation of that inelegance, minus the pretense of the public interest, because that's been abandoned in this landscape. Cloud policy also elaborates the kind of conceptual and practical inability of policy to keep pace with technological advances and practices in media industries, what I've kind of discussed as a regulatory hangover of sorts. That's the result of media and communications technologies really evolving far beyond their foundational regulatory paradigms and the policies designed to preserve the core values of diversity and openness and competition in a different era. This hangover has actually persisted since the beginnings of radio, and it's become a bona fide crisis in the digital era. Currently, it's affecting, among other things, data security, personal privacy, and the structures of governance to protect them both. safeguarding digital data in a policy landscape that is simultaneously local, national, regional, and global has created problems that often defy any kinds of legal paradigms and traditional geographies of control. So as a result, this complex landscape of laws and policies is really currently rife with unresolvable conflicts that are only proliferating as technology and the user cultures surrounding those technologies continue to outpace the vision and the foundations and the supposed architects of that policy. We'll start with the cloud, which is really, I'm sorry to say, just somebody else's computer. All of that data has to be stored somewhere. And I just first want to talk briefly about some of the regulatory dilemmas and related to the operation and functioning of data centers, which are the heart of the cloud and much of its physical infrastructure. And my goal here is to help illuminate how policies around digital freedoms and data are evolving in ways that are not always immediately obvious or legible or beneficial to private citizens. While the inspired public relations brainchild imagery of the cloud kind of conjures up emails and documents and TV series that are floating in space and just pulled down to earth and accessed on demand, the reality of cloud storage is much less ethereal. It's really just a genius marketing concept that renders the infrastructural realities of remote data storage, of putting your whole life somewhere else where you don't even know where it is, into some kind of palatable abstraction for people who know that they're using it or not. One of my favorite recent Pew surveys revealed that 95% of people who think they are not using the cloud actually are, whether it's in the act of shopping or banking or gaming online or social media or using streaming media or even storing your photos. There was a really great statistic about cloud imposters too, something crazy like 65% of people on either a job interview or a first date lie about knowing about the cloud. They know nothing about it, I don't know. So, I don't know, are you a cloud imposter? That's an interesting thing to think about. The book, a great book called The Prehistory of the Cloud by Khuê has noted that the cloud as an idea has exceeded its technological platform and become a potent metaphor for the way contemporary society organizes and understands itself. Indeed, we rely as much on the metaphor of the cloud as we do on its infrastructure to make sense of its function in our lives. And despite all of this abstract rhetoric and imagery, the cloud is, of course, quite material and very dependent on a vast series of networked computers in what's known as server farms or data centers spread all over the world for their operation. And yet these data centers remain very invisible in many ways. I hear I'm inspired by Lisa Park's work on the politics of infrastructure and its strategic disguises that she writes, quote, keep citizens naive and uninformed about the network technologies they use and subsidize every day. She was writing about the antenna trees for the mobile telephone signals that are all around us in the form of fake palm trees and such. Never has that been more true than when we talk about data centers. They maintain a very high degree of secrecy, and I've talked a lot and written about elsewhere the selective kind of PR pushes by Google and other tech companies to kind of come inside and see where the internet lives. So here's some kind of colorful shots of computers and wires and routers and switches and pipes and hard drives that arguably render this infrastructure, I think, much less visible when it's decontextualized. It kind of becomes a hyper-visible form of abstract art. There are also these amazing pictures of deer grazing. I could go on forever, but it's 20 minutes. So, deer grazing through giant data centers with mist rising above the mountains. It's like, I talk about it elsewhere as infrastructure porn, because it is. But the jurisdiction over the cloud and this data and how it's legally regulated and understood when it's stored in data centers in one country passes through and is stored in others, often simultaneously, and exists in several foreign territories as well as both federal and state jurisdictions in the U.S., which creates significant what's called choice of law problems when trying to determine what laws apply to disputes or even what courts can hear these cases. Into this void have stepped private corporations that in many ways have created the tail wagging the dog as they increasingly dictate media policy with their terms of service and end-user licensing agreements, which might be up there somewhere, TOS and ULAs. And these often have stipulations, including choice of law provisions. So, Amazon Web Services, for example, is a massive cloud utility hosting almost 1/3 of all internet sites, including the CIA, which has a $600 million contract with them, the U.S. Navy, the Federal Reserve, the Department of Defense. My favorite thing now is that also there's a new Amazon thing where you just give them the key to some fake key to your door, so while they're hosting the CIA, they can also walk into your house and what could go wrong? So I'll come back and give a talk on securities next year on that. Once we see all the disasters, that's just amazing. Anyway, Amazon has data centers located all over the U.S. and all over the world. But Amazon requires that any cloud computing dispute be resolved in Washington State, as they're based in Seattle. So even if the user is located in Europe, any problem you have is going to be resolved in Seattle. So when you click I agree, you agree that the laws of the state of Washington govern your usage of that utility, and you consent to exclusive jurisdiction of any of those courts. I think we should all spend some time looking at these ULAs and user license agreement, and I do mean time. iTunes agreement is longer than Macbeth. PayPal's is longer than Hamlet. I use them as reading assignments in my future of media course, and I believe they're foundational texts for media scholars. They've become so ridiculous that one of our colleagues, Professor Christian Sandvig at the University of Michigan, is suing Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General of the U.S., over them in Sandvig v. Sessions. The ACLU is challenging the constitutionality of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which makes it a federal crime to access a computer in a manner that, quote, exceeds authorized access, according to their terms of service. This law, which has been called the worst law in technology and the most outrageous criminal law you've never heard of, many of you have probably heard of it because of its role in the case against Eric Schwartz, but it's an insanely vague federal anti-hacking law that basically criminalizes everything everybody in this room does. Online research and prevents academics, researchers, and journalists from doing their work in a way that's not sanctioned by the site itself. So the corporate overreach that's filling the vacuum left by the relevant policy, by the lack of relevant policy in this space, has also been eroding our rights and freedoms as digital citizens. And the domestic legal landscape is just one of many relevant jurisdictions. Every country has its own patchwork of laws and regulations that concern data and privacy. Keeping track of them is its own full-time job. It's really nearly impossible. Merely keeping track of where the data resides is a job in and of itself. So overall, the jurisdiction, the sovereignty, and the governance of data, particularly that which is stored in and accessed across national borders, is extremely complex and ill-defined, and the largest looming legal problem for governments and industries all over the world. So it's a chapter that's giving me a few problems, and I'm glad I've had the time to work on it with this grant. Still, with respect to this issue, we are, as one legal scholar has put it, quote, sailing into the future on a sinking ship. And I see that as literally now we're starting to store data under the sea to get around any type of national jurisdiction problem. So Microsoft is a big kind of forerunner of this, and we're starting to put our stuff underwater instead of in a giant kind of football field building on the ground. The rights to and the ownership of this data is another constellation of issues that has so far eluded consistent policy definition and legal definitions. Some services actually claim ownership of the data that they process, while others say they're just the custodian, while it's temporarily processed and stored on their servers, absolving them of all ownership and all responsibility. And the resulting implications for institutional and personal privacy and even national security are profound. So sometimes you own your data in the cloud and sometimes it gets owned. And this control of sensitive government data by privately controlled cloud infrastructure. So the US government in particular has pretty much everything on Amazon Web Service. Particularly that which is located in multiple nations and jurisdictions. So that stuff isn't just kept in the US, it's kept all over the world. This is a really precarious trend for the future of data security and digital privacy. Again, related to the jurisdiction issue, digital policies increasingly being driven by terms of service agreements, EULAs, and corporate agreements of providers and carriers, all written by lawyers, none of whom know anything about or care anything about culture. Instead of by the vision of governments or any principled application of regulatory philosophy, which is usually the province of economists and a few lawyers too, but at least sometimes they talk to people who think about culture or bring them in to give a talk and ignore them, but at least there's I've been that person parading in. Always the weirdest thing, it's weird that I'm a woman and it's weird that I'm a humanist, but the weirdest thing for all the mommies is that I'm from California, which I don't know why. Anyway, in their book, The End of Ownership, Erin and Jason Schultz write that license terms and agreements are, quote, long, inscrutable, and full of bad news. They're the Lars von Trier films of legal documents. and now they function as a form of privately made law that works at the expense of consumers. And it's much more this informal type of regulation that's determining the limits and behavior and constellation of rights in this space more than anything else. That Apple FBI standoff over the iPhone encryption of a suspected terrorist is an interesting example, and it also just really the most dramatic one in a sea of every day. Now we're in an opt-out of surveillance if you can figure out how era of privacy affordances. Or as Cambridge Analytica just revealed, an opt-in whether you know it or not. And this has dramatically impacted our culture. Netflix, for example, is, of course, first and foremost a data analytics company, and has said that 100% of its decisions are based on the nuggets of data it collects from viewers every time they log on. So the scope of this data that it collects from its 100 million streaming subscribers is staggering. Search data, ratings data, location data, how many times you fall asleep watching the same thing, or rewatch something data, on what device, what social media references are connected to it, it's all there. So our taste cultures and our cultural options really are now cultivated by big data-centric decisions. Speaking to how pervasive algorithmic culture has become really in general beyond our entertainment choices. Charlton Gillespie has certainly done some great work on that, discussing not just the elements of inclusion and exclusion, but also anticipation, evaluative values and practice, and what he calls, quote, the production of calculated publics in his analysis of the overwhelming force that algorithms have become in our lives. Fred Turner has also added that algorithms render their creators invisible inasmuch as they are deeply embedded in complex machines and codes. So this additional dimension of surveillance as fortifying the gates really starts to complicate human agency and our own desires in this space. I recognize the tremendous challenges and obstacles involved with the questions that I'm asking and posing, including the cultural definitions cultural differences in the definitions of privacy and security, a lack of coordinated global effort in internet governance, and clashing international standards, or you could call it an absence of consensus about technological and even psychological norms for data security. But There are larger cultural issues and freedoms and rights that are at stake that are entirely critical to the health of democratic political systems, of digital citizenry, and global communication and culture. And looking at these often invisible forms of infrastructure and their regulatory architectures and histories of inelegance are some ways into that conversation. It's also a way to invite media and other humanities scholars to think about the stakes of these policy visions and what they really mean for cultural definitions of autonomy, personal information, and privacy. It also demands that we consider the creep of tyranny into this landscape and the true costs of surveillance, the sacrifices and legacies of mobility and industrialization and convenience, as well as the mighty power of access and the vulnerabilities baked into our desire to share. The scholar Étienne de Solopoul, who wrote Technologies of Freedom, presciently pointed to our current concerns when he first noted in 1983, quote, "The onus is on us to determine whether free societies in the 21st century will conduct electronic communication under the conditions of freedom established for the domain of print through centuries of struggle, or whether that great achievement will become lost in the confusion about new technologies." This onus and responsibility demands, in the end, an accounting for the erasure of the public interest, which has been disappeared as a central component of the vision behind regulatory policy for our media. It has been lost to the overwhelming force of deregulated and oligopolistic service providers who pretend to answer to capture regulatory agencies awash in lobbying funds and run by their best friends and former colleagues. That's me, by the way. It's somehow long forgotten that just a year ago, very early on in Trump's first term, the Republican Congress voted to sell out American citizens' privacy to the highest bidder, removed Obama-era FCC privacy protections, and undid the last rules that prevented ISPs, Internet Service Providers, whom you pay an obscene amount to every month, from selling your personal information. Now that they've done that, your browsing history, your online activity, your location, your digital footprint, they are all free for cable and wireless providers to do whatever they want with. And you will never know that they're using it or how or when, but you can be sure that they are. What they're doing is selling your information to the highest bidder, but it does not belong to them. It's yours. Worst of all, that bill prevents the FCC from ever establishing any similar consumer privacy protections again. That insidious and blatant attack on its own citizenry, the government's casting aside of the public interest for the private gain that is becoming all too routine and familiar, is the true regulatory crisis from which I fear we may never recover. I look forward to your thoughts and comments, and the conversations I've had lately with humanists after years spent talking to lawyers and regulators have been the most fruitful and interesting and generative that I've had in a long time. So I look forward to the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you for setting the table for next year and for engaging all of us in a downward spiral into utter despair. So wonderful. Thank you, Jennifer. And Eric, the parachute's up to you. Eric Prieto is professor in and former chair of the Department of French and Italian and an affiliate of comparative literature. He earned his BA in French literature from the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana and his MA and PhD in French literature from NYU. His monographs include Literature, Geography, and the Postmodern Poetics of Place, and Listening In, Music, Mind, and the Modernist Narrative. He is editor as well of the collection Rethinking Césaire and of a special section of Small Acts, a journal of Caribbean studies. The project that the IHC has supported is part of the first book-length study of literary representations of informal urbanization in the Global South, and it places special emphasis on the performative ability of literary text to generate new ways of seeing that contest and refine inherited sociological and urbanistic categories. Although this is a topic usually assigned to the social sciences, Eric's study promises to demonstrate the value of a specifically humanistic approach, as well as the value of a critical methodology emphasizing interconnected global processes over the more traditional focus on national traditions. Balls in your court. Take us somewhere, Eric. Help me with Eric Prieto.
I don't know how much of a parachute shantytowns are. But thank you for that introduction, and it's really good to thank the grant sponsor for funding one's research, but I really want to emphasize the depth of my gratitude because this time off gave me some much needed mental space for Jennifer to step back and really rethink about the things that I was doing in my project. And it's led to a real sharpening of my approach that hopefully will appear here, at least through a new subtitle. And that was the extent of my really quick there. So the new subtitle is Urban Crisis is Representational Crisis. And I guess there's nothing particularly new or surprising or clever about literary scholar deciding to focus on representation. That's pretty much all we do. But this particular shift helped me to bring some order to the large and unruly and ever-expanding corpus that I've been working on. And perhaps even more importantly, it helped me to resolve one of the big methodological conundrums I've been facing, which is how to bring my research in the social sciences and public policy milieux into a more productive dialogue with my work on literature and humanities projects. And so by focusing on representational questions through this notion of crisis, I began to see how both social and literary developments are being driven actually by the same set of changes in the underlying material structure of modern life. And the logic here is a familiar one, which is that changing material reality to generate new social structures, which create in turn the need for new representational and analytic tools to help decipher and map these changes. And so what I'd like to do today is just give you a quick bird's eye view of the book's topic and general approach, and then spend a little more time with a couple of the chapters that I've been working on during this grant period. And to begin, I don't know how really meaningful this is going to be out of context, but just to give you an idea of the variety of issues I've been working with, this is kind of the current state of my table of contents. With apologies to Susan because it's changing entirely from the post. So to kind of set the stage, some statistics on urban informality, which if you're not familiar with this topic, are really eye-popping. Globally, 70 million people every year leave the countryside for the city. And in the developing world, a large and growing percentage of those people find themselves in informal settlements of some kind. So that today, according to UN estimates, almost 2 billion people live in some type of substandard extra-legal housing. That's a quarter of the human population and fully half of the city dwellers in the global south. They go by various names: shantytowns, barrios, inns, favelas, Getchikondu, and I'll be talking about Getchikondu in a couple minutes, and more menacingly, squatter cities and mega slums. And what they have in common is that they tend to be characterized by conditions of extreme poverty and precarity. Since 90% of urban growth is occurring in the developing world, the number of people living in these conditions is expected to grow prodigiously in the coming decades. Now, many in the architectural and urban planning communities have begun to recognize that this is really something unprecedented, a radically new urban or form of urbanization, and it represents a major challenge to their discipline that will require a new language, a new representational structure, new conceptual and analytic frameworks. So to give you a couple of examples, the Dutch so-called starchitect, Holt, who works on these kind of urban issues, particularly in Lagos, Nigeria, has bemoaned the lack of an adequate disciplinary vocabulary and emphasize the need for a new, quote, conceptual framework to describe, interpret, and understand exactly those forces that could redefine and revitalize the field. I better move quickly here. So, in a similar way, the urban theorist Tom Averment has written of the need to, quote, reconfigure the heartland of architectural and urban thinking, and notably, again, by turning to the megalopoli of the global south. And to give one more example, Alejandro Aravena was recently awarded the Pritzker Prize, the Nobel Prize of Architecture, in particular for his work on these kinds of issues, has challenged socially conscious architects to, quote, go beyond architecture and speak the languages of these other disciplines, like economics and ecology, before translating their discussions into formal design proposals. So all three of them, and there are many others that I won't name here, but they agree that there is a representational crisis in the field, creating the need for a new language of urban design, and that the most pertinent objects of study for the development of such a language are in the global south. And although they all have shared notions of what such a language would have to account for, they also share this feeling that they're not yet in a position to spell out exactly what the central elements of that language will be. And the enabling premise of my work on this subject has been that literary depictions of the informal city can play a valuable role in the search for new conceptions, terminologies, and approaches that they provide us with more bottom-up view. Of course, as a literary scholar, I have a vested interest in saying things like that. So let me emphasize that my point, and my position has actually evolved on this over the last year. My point is not that literary representation or criticism has some kind of privileged status or superior insight that makes it possible for we literary types to dictate terms of planning and development specialists and professionals, which would be kind of ridiculous. But it does, I think, have a number of what you might call comparative advantages that enable literature to participate in that process in various ways. And I've made up a list of some of these. I'm not going to comment on any of these elements, but again, to give you an idea of some of the things I've been thinking about that have been useful for me in this approach. And so, to reiterate, rather than treating literature as something that must be regarded in isolation from or opposition to other modes of discourse, I've become convinced of the need to emphasize its continuity with them and seek to understand various discursive tools that literary works share with non-literary works, and how these different kinds of discourse can work together as members of the larger discursive field, to borrow from Foucault, city writing. To put this in a slightly different way, my approach to the subject is interdisciplinary, not in the sense that it seeks to read the literary works in the context of scientific and public policy studies, but as a mode of discourse that can be situated in the same discursive plane with them and is constantly engaged in a kind of performative exchange with them. This is the kind of thing that the French philosopher and sociologist Henri Lefebvre theorized in terms of transduction and lived space. One implication of this is that it doesn't just imply the legitimacy of reading literary works with an eye to their real world implications, but also the need to subject scientific and public policy documents to the same kind of close reading and deconstructive analysis that we routinely use for literary works. And first, that's kind of what you're doing. So let me give one example of how I approach this last point. This is from my chapter on Mike Davis's highly influential book from 2006, Planet of Slums. Yes, for that. And I understand this to be an important book that did quite a bit of valuable work in bringing the problems associated with informal urbanism into view for a large segment of the reading public, and encourage them to learn more about the issue. I'm one of those people that kind of got started with these. But it's also a highly problematic study which promoted a kind of apocalyptic vision of informal settlements, treating them as essentially undifferentiated places of absolute suffering and social death, and treating their inhabitants as people completely deprived of agency and hope, and who are essentially living at the level of bare life in Agamben's sense of the term. But actually, and I spent a lot of time working with this book, cited extensively by Humanities scholars who tend to give it a lot of weight. Almost all the reviews by social scientists, all of the social scientists I asked about this in person, who have any kind of expertise in this field, are very dismissive of his work. And there, there's a chapter on it, which in a couple of years you'll be able to read about. So without kind of enumerating those weaknesses, what I want to argue very briefly here is that they stem from a number of rhetorical decisions that Davis made early on in his composition of the book. And in particular, the decision to write from a kind of top-down, prophetic perspective that kind of leverages a remote theoretical perspective in combination with kind of weighty statements about the future of the planet. And linked to that is the fact that despite his claims about social death and the lack of individual agency in Shantytown, he actually gives a short shrift to accounts of shantygoers himself, the people who work in the shanty with him. And then, to what extent these are all intertwined, I think becomes clear. But he tends to filter all his accounts of the informal city through a kind of doctrinaire interpretation of Marx that I think ends up obscuring as much as it reveals. And I want to be clear on this point. It's not the Marxism itself that is the problem here. There's actually some great kind of Marxist critique of the World Bank and IMF in the 1980s, kind of neo-liberal moment. But he tends to deploy his critiques in a kind of high-handed, all-or-nothing manner, which I've started to call Marx-splaining, that again tends to obscure as much as it reveals. And I think that here again this point is closely related to this representational crisis I've been talking about. The informal city or informal urbanism phenomenon seems to be the kind of thing that confounds the well-entrenched arguments that all of us use, whether on the left or the right. And so I think this is a topic that suggests the need for a new kind of political analysis. And I'll have more to say on this on this particular point at the end of my talk. But as a way to kind of lay the groundwork for that, I want to discuss two of the novels that I have been working on in the last few months. And the first of these is Orhan Pamuk's novel, The Strangeness in My Mind, which superimposes the personal life of its protagonist, Mevlut, onto the public life of the city of Istanbul in a way that is meant to be taken to have clear allegorical implications, and I can't really elaborate how that works right here either. But I'll just kind of, again, go to the conclusion and say that Mevlut's experience in the Gecekondu settlements of Istanbul is meant to be taken as typical of the experience of rural to urban migrants in general. Mevlut left his impoverished little village in Anatolia with the dream of making it big in a big city, only to find himself struggling for survival in a one-room, self-built hut with a pit toilet and a dirt floor. And the paradox that over time Mevlut comes to love his home and neighborhood to the point that many years later, when the neighborhood is being demolished and the residents transition into modern state-subsidized housing, he, along with many of those neighbors, actually kind of breaks down and cries as he realizes that that home, that sad Gecekondu, has become the place in the world that he has most loved. And there are a lot of this really is typical of a lot of the stories that you hear of this kind of migration. And so on one level, we could just kind of assume that provides rebuttal to Davis, which I think we'll be going too quickly. I'll come back to that in a moment. But what I want to propose in my reading of the novel is that this logic does indeed apply more broadly to the politics of informal urbanism. And in fact, one of the kind of underappreciated accomplishments of Pamuk's novel is the way in which he not normalizes, but de-essentializes life in the informal settlements. Rather than treating them as undifferentiated places of social death and suffering, as Davis tends to do, Pamuk's novel historicizes them and emphasizing the extent to which the varieties of human life go on there much as they do everywhere else, and showing how the people there are not irrevocably trapped in the amber of social exclusion, but our leading lives for social advancement is, if not assured, at least a very real possibility. And we see all kinds, a whole spectrum of different outlooks for the various characters that populate the novel. So again, we don't want to jump too quickly to conclusions here, especially because there may be good reasons to be skeptical of the rosy spin that Pamuk's novel puts on Hitchcock. For one thing, Pamuk's own upbringing was a decidedly privileged one, and we might wonder, might he not be romanticizing poverty in this novel, exoticizing it as a poverty he never experienced firsthand. And Pamuk himself admitted this possibility in his autobiographical memoir, Istanbul, Memories of the City. And more generally, we need to be careful in all such accounts of urban life to consider the possibility that they are corrupted by various forms of bias that blind them to the harsher realities of ghetto life or the underlying structural determinants that block the social mobility of the truly disadvantaged. So with those concerns in mind, what I want to do now is turn to another Turkish novel, this one by Latife Tekin, and the title is Verdi Kristin, Tales from the Garbage Hills. And Tekin provides an interesting contrast to Pamuk because she was herself a rural urban migrant who grew up in a Hitchcock. And also because her novel was much further in its representational and rhetorical efforts to convey a powerful sense of the sufferings and destitution of the Hitchcock dwellers. Unlike Pamuk, Tekin gives us really a kind of hellish view of the squatter settlement she described, and which is presented in terms that appear, at least at first read, to be much closer to Mike Davis' apocalyptic vision than to Pamuk's. But I've made up a little summary of the novel that shows the successive struggles of the inhabitants of the garbage hills. And if we take a look at that, a new pattern emerges. Again, I'm not going to read it to you, but I think you can make this out on your own. The novel is structured as a series of vignettes that depict various stages in the development of the garbage hills. These are, in essence, a series of battles between the squatters and their successive enemies. But despite all the negativity and emphasis on suffering and strife in each of the novel's chapters, we can already begin to see from the summary that the general arc of the novel is actually one of steady social and economic progress. Perhaps surprisingly, this novel turns out, like Pamuk's, to be a story about the progressive normalization of the settlement. It's not a story about misery and destitution, although it certainly depicts plenty of that, but a story about a community that, by the end of the novel, has been rather successfully incorporated into the economic and social fabric of the city. And we can see this in number 6, where the struggles now are the struggles of the relatively affluent. Oh, that is a quite relative affluence. And again, time constraints are just a problem here, but reading this against the social science studies on these issues, this dual reading has all kinds of implications for debates in urban planning theory. And most obviously, I think, even without kind of in-depth knowledge of the field, it suggests that modest forms of on-site slum upgrading, the kind of sites and services and incremental housing plans that were first promoted by John Turner in the 1960s, can indeed be more appropriate in both economic and humanitarian terms than the kinds of forced relocations into high-density housing blocks that were characteristic of what Justin McWhirr called the modernist moment in the 1950s and 60s of urban development, and which happens to be the kind of thing that Davis implicitly prefers. And these novels have suggested things to say about a number of other important planning issues, the respective roles of the public and private sectors, relative advantages of top-down versus bottom-up planning, the cost and benefits of transitioning from the informal into the formal sector, and a number of other issues. But rather than dive into those here, I want to conclude by returning to that point I made earlier about the insufficiency of kind of conventional left-right political arguments about capitalism when considered in light of the kind of urban poverty that we're talking about here. All of the works that I've studied for this project, whether fiction or nonfiction, emphasize the workings of the informal economy. They feature invariably a cast of small fry capitalists and micro entrepreneurs who work on the fringes of the formal economy. Borrowers, street vendors, buskers, garbage pickers, hot job men, petty criminals, anarchists, prostitutes, drug dealers, anyone who engages in the kind of low margin, precarious economic activity that takes place under the radar of the state. Now, Mike Davis tends to be reflexively suspicious of this kind of activity, the informal economy in general, which he characterizes on several occasions as survivalism, kind of barely keeping body and soul together. And for many thinkers on the left, this kind of logic does indeed seem complicit with the logic of neoliberalism, a kind of caving in to the coercive tactics of what Naomi Klein called disaster capitalism, which exploits the desperation and political weakness of the poor to voice capital-friendly politics on them that will ultimately keep them worse off than they were before. And, I understand the value of that kind of analysis, and I actually agree with the need to remain vigilant about these risks. Nonetheless, I think that someone like Robert Neuwirth gets closer to the truth about the informal economy when he decides he's going to systematically use the French term système D to talk about it, which implies a much more optimistic stance toward the informal economy and even a certain kind of admiration for the opportunistic, tactical thinking, which he thinks can actually have significant positive social effects that are beneficial to all. So that's a debate we could have, but to end quickly, what I would emphasize is that these kinds of practices have inherently ambivalent, undecidable quality that can't be resolved in terms of pro and anti-capitalist or neoliberal ideologies. And this ambivalence is nicely captured in a recent article by Nandita Badavi, who I think is a Berkeley, in her treatment of the informal economy, which she examines in terms of the Punjabi word jugaad. And this is a term which she translates as repair, but can also be taken to mean something like hacking or bricolage or système or DIY, and is a central feature of pretty much all of the practices that go on in the informal economy. And I want to read what she says about this to conclude. Practices of jugaad sit at an interesting crossroads where the relationship between people and objects can be thought of in two radically different ways. In one case, is that which quintessentially defines capitalism above all else, that is, innovation, and in another, as an existence beyond that system. The question, what does it mean to repair, becomes politically charged when the act of repair can be seen simultaneously as something that helps repair the system on the one hand, and on the other hand, is operating to subvert it. And this, I think, suggests a much more complex relationship with capitalism than the usual left, right, for, or against schisms that we seem to be so routinely engaged in these days. And it's also, I would argue, a much more fitting model for understanding the kinds of phenomena that make up life in the informal city, which requires that I think that we dispense with the usual political presuppositions. Not necessarily to try to locate some happy middle ground that might be called centrist or moderate or conciliatory or consensus-driven, but by opportunistically seeking out pragmatic solutions wherever they might be on a political perspective. Thank you.
Thank you all. I actually had, I want to say something about despair, and then I had a couple of questions and a comment. I think despair is really instructive in the classroom and in political life, because the way I've been teaching despair is that it's not the opposite of hope, like the opposite of hope is apathy. And so I think the hope despair spectrum is a really important way to think about the moment. So in that vein, Jen, I just wanted you to maybe give us some tools with, what should I do with documents? Other than saying agree. So it happened with the smart TV, and it basically said, are you going to allow me to watch you for the rest of your life? And I wanted to say no, and then other than turning it off and not updating it. So I guess I just want some tools, maybe pedagogical tools more than anything else. Do you think people outside of media should also be giving? I really like the reading assignment, should we be doing that I feel really is also very compelled by the work, and it crosses very much with my own interests. I'm a historian, so it won't be a surprise for me to say that I think thinking historically about some of these things will be powerful and helpful, because I think too often the informal is tied to the neoliberal in ways that are ahistorical. So informal economy, I think, is as much of a construct as economy, right? And so I think that there are really productive ways that thinking historically about these for an earlier period, because I feel like someone like Julia Elliott-Shar, who often writes about neoliberalism as a kind of shorthand for talking about everything that's wrong with the present, which is sort of, you're pushing us in that way. And so I guess I'm asking for a little bit of a more historical take that will allow you to continue making these critical interventions about how we think about capital.
About the informal economy, it's, I'm a loud person, do I really need that? So. Okay, but I'm more focused on the housing question, and I have been looking into the kind of historical aspect of that. And urban informality has always existed. You could even say it's a kind of natural part of the life cycle of the city. And certainly all the great European metropolises went through their informal phases. And you could say that a lot of the vernacular architecture that we identified with different regions, come out of this kind of self-built housing thing. Maybe we could see the favelas of Rio in that light, as a real kind of Brazilian style. So that's kind of my way of thinking of the historical depth of it. And I don't think that I call this new and unprecedented, and so it's not in terms of those practices, but it's in terms of the scale and the density and the possibility, which is what Davis is concerned that this becomes kind of the permanent state of exception, and it's not a transitional phase. Cities like Istanbul seem to actually be putting through that, in part due to works in their legal structure. So, I'll leave it at that.
That's what your question about tools is what all of my students, kind of looked at me after our lectures and just say, what do I do? And I feel like personally I've turned into much more of an activist teacher, and that means getting them acquainted with structures of governance that control their lives and encouraging them to take responsibility for their role in that. And for the first time ever, I have to say, the last year, I have felt like a fire in them too, and that has really made me less despairing and made me very hopeful, because they are like all we have. And as for tools, I mean, you have a few options. Our friend Wynne Twine in sociology talks about her return to Victorianism, and you can just sign off, right, and just write letters to each other and whatever. Or, which is, if you have to participate in the digital economy, such as having a phone and dealing with all of the things that you do, I mean, I resist, and to me, resisting is just, I give the wrong things all the time. Anytime I'm forced to give information, I make stuff up. I lie about my race, my age, my look. I just lie all the time. And that just makes me feel better, but it also makes, in the big picture, I've recently read something from an economic perspective about how oil is not the most valuable commodity anymore, it's data. And you are the owners of your data. It's being completely perverted in this landscape to have corporations own your data. So the only thing I can do is encourage people to take control of their own data and either hide it or, take control in some way that doesn't share it freely, because that's a new business model that also infringing on your liberties as a person.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Sure.
Sure. So it's a very sensitive question because the parents definitely are on my toughest struggle in this account. Partly because I'm not likely to be able to interview. Also, I think there's a temptation either to demonize them very easily, they can be demonized, or to just excuse them, exculpate them on a cultural level. Like, oh, they can't help it. They're just products of their cultural doctrine. Either, I think, is too easy in terms of cop out. I definitely came, I encountered this very forcefully when I was speaking to the youth pastor. It is so hard to find people to speak to, it's fun. But the only one who knew the family, he wanted to impress it on they were very nice, very good, and that he really was not going to sign off on an account that made the parents look like, horrible type of parenting type of figures. I don't know. I think it'll take more working out, more time.
Questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation. Sorry, this isn't a very well-formed question just yet. I think maybe another couple people would have questions to ask first. But I was thinking about this idea that performing close readings on these, terms of service agreements. And then
Students can't believe it when they do it.
yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea. I always try to teach as much close reading as I can in my classes. And the students definitely need more of that. And then I was also thinking, Eric, when you mentioned that you had been speaking to social scientists about the Davis book and how they found that it wasn't very compelling, his methodology. And if I understand correctly, one of your goals of your book is to kind of create a new way of talking about a phenomenon that is usually seen as a social science, something that should be studied by social science, and take the humanities view of it. And Jennifer, I kind of see you doing the same thing. And I'm wondering if in your discussions with social scientists, you have seen interest in that. And from my own personal experience, I always try to have conversations with social scientists, and they always think it's kind of interesting what I'm doing, but don't really exactly see an application for it, or often don't readily see an application for it. And I was just wondering if you guys had any, wanted to share your experiences in trying to do that.
I could share a couple. One is I presented work to the FCC at a workshop on the future of broadband, and I brought my grad student, and we had worked really hard, and we were, like I said, we were definitely the only humanists in the room, and I had to go to the bathroom all to myself, and it was, it was we were kind of like a novelty. All of the people, all of the government figures who were there were really interested in it, but they didn't know how to translate that into action, They didn't know how to directly make it something they could either leverage or make into an action point. And so when we left, my grad student said, no wonder they make such terrible decisions, after we had kind of been in the room with them for 3 days, because the culture in and of itself, or users themselves, are not really of interest. So that whole experience really blew my mind as far as how far away we were from how we thought about things. And then I've also spent time doing consulting for Warner Brothers with the Media Industry Project, and I worked with a student on talking about the dimensions of privacy. And 3 years ago, we were trying to say, we don't care about how you monetize privacy, but we understand you do, and what we're trying to say is privacy is a valuable commodity, it's a really important construct, and people value it enough to maybe to pay for it in some way, to bake that into how we engage with media. And now we're seeing some of that, but the kind of, monetization of privacy in the industry is something that was not catching on at the time. So I do feel very much like, I experience media as a user, right, and as a fan and as a professor, but mostly I'm a professor of media because I love media more than anything. And so, my first place of approaching it is as a lover of the stuff and as a user. So I feel like I'm more connected to culture, and then I kind of go down the rabbit hole of law and policy. But we speak very different languages, and I don't know why I'm so interested in the challenge of translation, but it has become a really invigorating and exciting challenge for me. Yeah.
My topic actually has a kind of natural in for people in the social sciences, geographers especially, because the informal settlements, one of the kind of big fundamental principles is it has to be kind of bottom-up driven. You have to consult with those who have an interest in the phenomenological experience of living. Yeah, so I don't deal with cold technocrats. The talks I give is usually a couple of geographers or anthropologists who work in these issues who will show up. I'm working with a British scholar on this now, getting ready to do a talk at the, I forget if it's the AAG or the AGA, it's the American Geographical Association. So I think there's a kind of mutual interest there.
So even the section of like fiction, they're
interested
in that.
A lot of people that do field work, and a lot of them do, are interested in the fiction and thinking about kind of how well it reflects what they're seeing, the people they talk to. And then there's a whole middle ground which I wanted to talk about today that I cut out of kind of more journalistic or anthropological approach that really cross the divide between the two fields. A book I would recommend to everyone in this room is Catherine Booth's Behind the Beautiful Forevers, where she goes and basically follows the lives of a few people in a slum in Mumbai. And that's just a beautiful kind of poetic work, but that's really thinking about the social issues.
And so this would be more like the humanistic social sciences rather than the more quantitative social sciences.
Yeah. From what I know of the field, and there are entire journals devoted to informal urbanism, and it tends to rely less on kind of quantitative analysis, except maybe for general statistics about kind of the incredible scale of things in some places. But I don't really know enough to definitively about that.
I suggest that we continue our conversation